This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Hurrdat Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, welcome to the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith. I had my first camp of what is extended camp season this weekend, so I'm a little all over the place today, friend. I'm joined by managing editor of Hail Varsity, Brandon Vogel. Brandon, thank you for being back on the show. It's been a while since I've had you on. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I didn't contribute to your camp. We'll call it a camp hangover by having a hard baby out here early in the morning, but we'll soldier on.
No, it's fine. I think this is the second or third week in a row, actually, that we've done this exact time for the podcast. Like, it's starting to become a thing. I don't know if Cam loves, shout out to Cam, that it's becoming a thing, but we'll see how that goes. But I kind of like it. Like, you're fresh right there in the morning. We talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we keep it pushing. And each week we have a few mainstays of the show. The first one is called Coach Speak, where we go over something that a coach, player, or talking head said, and then we give you the straight up breakdown of what they meant.
Coach Speak to real talk.
This week comes from head coach of LSU, Brian Kelly, and his new family. He said, quote, "I never went into the office saying we can't win a title at Notre Dame," he said to Sports Illustrated. Quote, "I went into the office every day looking for a reason that we could. But part of the lure of this job at LSU is that there are many avenues towards that. There are not as many paths at Notre Dame. I'm not trying to skirt the answer as much as I really believe for me, it wasn't, I'm done here." Man, there's a lot there. So, Brandon, what did he mean by that?
Let's break that down.
Well, he's not wrong. And I think that, this is a rare instance where the coach speak feels a little bit kind of transparent and honest. That said, I still don't love it as a quote for Brian Kelly, because essentially what he's saying is, like, I was looking for a place with fewer hurdles, which I guess, you can't blame anybody for. And you look at the SEC and the fact that they kind of perennially now get two teams in. At Notre Dame, you've got one game of wiggle room, or you can maybe get in there at 11-1. You're never going to play in a conference championship game. Obviously, recruiting in the upper Midwest, Notre Dame's done a pretty good job, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But it's tougher than recruiting at LSU. I mean, have you looked at Notre Dame's schedule for 2022 yet?
I have not yet, no.
Let me run it off for you. They open at Ohio State, face Marshall, pretty good CUSA team. Cal, not bad defensively, at North Carolina. BYU, really good team. Yeah. Stanford, UNLV, Syracuse, Clemson. Then they've got Navy, pesky option team right after Clemson, Boston College, and at USC. FPI has them 5th in the country with a projected record of 9-3. And if you go 9-3, great year. You're a really good team. You're not going to the playoff.
Right, yeah, you're definitely not. And boy, that Clemson Navy back-to-back is no joke. Like, it doesn't, like, on the surface, it doesn't feel like it, but as you pointed out, that's a tricky option team to play after Clemson, who will, in all likelihood, win another double-digit games this season and look to have what will be a bounce-back year for them after winning double digits last year, which is super fascinating to me. That's neither here nor there. I do agree with you that it is both transparent and true, what Brian Kelly said, and at the same time a little bit weird. And one of the paths, though, that you do have available to you at LSU that I think you don't necessarily have at Notre Dame, it is related to recruiting. Like, one of the things that makes it really difficult about Notre Dame, or more difficult, I guess I should say, than other schools, the academic standards that they have at that school. It's just a fact, a reality of major college football, that other schools that have the same aspirations, I guess, that they have on a yearly basis just simply don't run into, right? Like, you see it very rare. Like, Stanford has, like, I guess, as stringent of academic standards, but they're not at the same level, right? Like, we're not talking about the same thing. They've been good. I don't want to say despite that. They've been good working around that. And Notre Dame has as well. It just makes it a lot harder. Like, your pool of players is definitely smaller to pick from at Notre Dame than it is at LSU, which I don't want to say that they're on far other end of the spectrum from Notre Dame, but it definitely is a different stratosphere of academic standards, right? I think that that's fair. And your point about the SEC is really good, because I think that that's part of it too, in that if you say instead of going 9-3 with that schedule at Notre Dame, you end up in the SEC and you go 10-2, but win the SEC championship game or make it to the SEC championship game, and say that final loss of the season or your second loss of the season is in that game, you still got a shot to go in to the college football playoff. And so that does make it makes it, to me, and I said this to Derek Peterson last week on the Varsity Club podcast. We were just talking about college football generally and teams that excite us or we are interested in seeing this season. Like Notre Dame was on my list because of Marcus Freeman, but part of what it is that whole coaching carousel that happened this off season has actually ratcheted up my interest in the sport, because a bunch of those situations are really interesting to me. LSU and Brian Kelly is one of them. Like, can he, I guess, not even assimilate to LSU, but is his style going to work there? Like, there's a lot going on with just him and LSU.
Yeah, that's the thing that gives me pause. Like it's a strange fit in my mind. I mean, you had Ed Ogeron, who was kind of like the perfect LSU coach out of Central Casting. I mean, and then you go all the way to the opposite end where you got Brian Kelly, a guy from Boston who fit perfectly at Notre Dame. Like it just, made sense. And now you drop him in Louisiana, and, expectations are going to be really high. I mean, they're always high at LSU. And I think that's what we're talking about, or what Brian Kelly was talking about, was there's just a little bit, the margins here are really slim, but Notre Dame, I think Brian Kelly did a great job getting Notre Dame into 2 playoffs. Was that their ceiling? Once you get there, you get a little fortunate in that semifinal, and all of a sudden you're playing for a national title.
Right.
Even if you may not be one of the quote unquote 4 best teams at LSU, I think when they get to a playoff, the expectations there in the running to win it. And that's maybe the difference there, but it's tiny. And, how many jobs are there that give you that over Notre Dame? It's not like Notre Dame is, decrepit.
Right. No, they're definitely not. And they're a team that, man, despite that schedule, I think that they have a shot to be in contention this year. I'm a big Marcus Freeman fan. I'm fascinated to see what he does out there. And one of the things with him and what makes it him and Kelly are obviously going to always kind of be linked, and people are going to compare and contrast what they do in their respective new jobs, right? But their styles could not be more different, right? You couldn't have a bigger contrast in how they're going to go about things. And Marcus Freeman kind of representing that new school coach that is more about the player relationship on the surface, more about the player relationship, all in on recruiting. And there's a handful of those guys. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed about what's happening with Notre Dame recruiting in general is that they've always recruited well, but they have always also kind of found 3-star gems, right? And they especially in the linebacker, if you just go and look at their linebacker history, it's been really kind of remarkable of what they've produced from 3-star guys. Doesn't seem to be the case with Marcus Freeman. You go and look at their recruiting list for the current class and for 2024. There's a lot of 4 stars hanging out in that group now, and they're in the running for different 5 stars too. And so they're trying to change that profile by doing things differently. Brian Kelly now has an entire new world of prospects that he can go after, not just because of the academics thing, but we've seen here with kind of Mickey Joseph and all the talent that's in Louisiana. There are just people, you just go out there and walk around and feels then you see a high level 4-star player. So that also gives you a different avenue, like he was saying, to being able to win. That whole thing it's just really interesting about those 2 schools and where they are in relation to each other and what's going to happen with them this season. And the expectations for both of them will be sky high. And it's funny, because reference again, me and Derek were talking about, USC, for example. And if they go 9-3 this year, or 8-4, say 8-4, in year 1 of a complete overhaul of what's happening at their program, they're at a school that's not going to be good enough. especially given the amount of money and the churn with the coaching carousel, which is going to be like kind of this looming factor, I think, over the entire college football season, that coaching carousel and the money that those guys got and all the kind of stuff that went on behind the scenes is going to make for some angry fan bases somewhere.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, and we'll get, that week 12 game, Notre Dame at USC, is going to be kind of fascinating for that, because at that point, like, Lincoln Riley and Marcus Freeman will be 11 games into their first season. We'll have a good sense of what those teams are. It'll be kind of interesting to see what the stakes are. You talking about Freeman's recruiting. I think the fact that he isn't so perfectly Notre Dame in the way that Brian Kelly was and few others would be, I think makes their recruiting ceiling a bit higher. I mean, if we were to fast forward 4 years from now, would it surprise you if, we just took average class rankings and Notre Dame was higher than LSU under Brian Kelly?
No, that wouldn't surprise me at all, because I do agree with you. I think that Marcus Freeman's just kind of the way he goes about things, I think really gives them a chance to elevate what they have going on. Yeah, I definitely think that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it takes a while to establish those connections, and, there's a ton of good prospects in LSU that, are probably going to have some sort of draw to LSU. It's going to be a program that they're at least familiar with. But you talk about, the high 4-star out of Houston, which, is pretty close to LSU territory. Who has a better shot to go land that guy, Marcus Freeman or Brian Kelly? Right. It's just the adjustment from Notre Dame to LSU that seems so big to me that gives me a little bit of pause.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on there, and that's why, for that reason, I think it's going to be so interesting to see like how things unfold, and by the way, how much patience they have down at LSU for the adjustment period that he may or may not face, and so we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. But one of the other things I definitely wanted to talk to you about today was it's NFL draft season, right? Which feels like snuck up on me somehow. Like, I don't know, like, like I do kind of know, like, college football this year has just been like, it does not feel like there's been an off season. We are technically in the off season for college football, but it does not feel like, between what happened with Nebraska over the off season, I guess in that January, February period where they were hiring the new coaches and all of that completely wiped out that off season, quote unquote, time. And this one is also kind of weird because of when they finish spring football. And then for me personally, them being in this evaluation period, and then that's going to butt up right against camp season, and then the transfer portal is also, like, you can't go too long talking about college football without mentioning the transfer portal. Like, there's a lot happening with that. But the NFL draft is also right around the corner, which has become, to me, kind of a weird time, I would say. And I'm curious your thoughts on this around Husker football, because I feel like this becomes the time where people start to hone in on, man, Nebraska's had a lot of struggles here, really, since I think that last Bo Pelini season. And so is that something that you agree with? Do you feel like that when we get to this time of year, that it starts to drudge up kind of those bad feelings about the state of the program?
Yeah, I think it does. So, you had the draft streak end a couple of years ago, which was one thing. It was kind of, it was apparent at that point when Nebraska was having like one guy selected late to keep that streak alive that, I think that's when it kind of turned to, okay, great, that's nice to have that and put it on your recruiting brochures. But you can see the problem here if you've only got one guy going in these years. And I think Prince Amukamara the last first round draft pick, or was it? I think it was.
I think it was Prince. Yeah.
Yeah. Really post Pelini, where you had Sue, you had David, you had Prince, some of those other DBs. Like, it's been a slow slide for Nebraska. This year, actually, looks comparatively good. You look around the country at the programs that Nebraska has historically competed with, that it wants to compete with again, and you see a pretty wide gap there.
Yeah, there's just a significant gap between what Nebraska is producing in the NFL and not even, honestly, the teams that they want to start getting back to competing with. It's the teams that they're competing with in the Big Ten West, right? Like, some of these teams, like, you look at Iowa, and this is the one that really gets people. Wisconsin is another one. It's starting to happen some with Minnesota as well, where you're seeing Purdue is a team too that that sneakily seems to always have someone at a high level, like, and maybe that'll kind of taper off here. We'll see if they continue to produce at least one big time guy a year. But that's been different than what Nebraska has been, where they feel like they have a surefire guy at least. You're right, though. This year it is different, and it feels comparatively speaking like a much better year for Nebraska. But to me, it's really interesting on how we got here with some of these guys. And the first one to me, in which is fascinating in a lot of different ways, Cam Jurgens and what's happened with him over the course. From you think about whenever you were made aware of Cam Jurgens as a high schooler in Beatrice to where he is now, as a potential second or third round pick, even you start to hear some stuff about him rising up, because there'll be just, probably 3 centers usually go in the top 100. And then we'll kind of go from there. And usually that's, third round. By the end of the third round, you'll have a few centers selected, and he's in the conversation to be one of those, 2 or 3, along with the guy from Iowa. But if you think about his journey, if I had told you when he was having those snapping issues that he would now be in this conversation, what would you have told me?
I probably would have told you maybe maybe after another season at Nebraska, which I know Husker fans certainly hoped for. But, and that's part of the thing that gives me pause with all of these draft discussions. It's not like we can look at draft picks and when they were picked and what that says about your ability to recruit talent, develop talent in some cases. But his rise shows me a little bit of just the gap between the NFL's trying to project for how well somebody would do in the NFL. College is a lot of similarities, but it's not one-to-one. With Cam, I still think, there's always going to be the regret there of it would have been nice to have one more year with him. Yeah. Or, if he had kind of advanced to, first team all Big Ten center while at Nebraska, it would probably hurt a little less to see him go from a strictly Nebraska football perspective. But overall, I still think it's a pretty good story for Nebraska. You had an in-state guy, highly touted guy you kind of got to get because it's always going to be that way with 4 stars in Nebraska. Yeah. And they did. Made the transition to center, said, I think this is your future. And we're seeing now as he continues to rise up the charts, they were kind of right about that. Mm-hmm. It just stings that I don't think Nebraska fans feel like they totally got to see the best of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think that that's the case for sure. But I also wonder if Nebraska is in a tricky position. And I don't know what I was expecting about Cam Jurgens' promotion, I guess, from Nebraska side of things coming up to the draft. Maybe we'll get more of it this week because we are in draft week. But I've been a little surprised that we have not seen more of Nebraska really out there trying to get in front saying, hey, and you don't have to say, hey, we made him switch positions and it worked out great for him. He's going to go make millions of dollars. You don't have to say it that way. There's plenty of ways to do it. You do the whole homegrown thing, all of that, beef jerky. There's all sorts of ways to do that. I am surprised, I don't know if you are, that we have not already seen more promotion of what seems to be his stock rising up on a rocket ship.
Yeah, I am a little bit and really when I look at Nebraska's kind of draft class, and I know we'll get through some more of these, I think there's a good story overall throughout all of them. Cam Taylor-Britt seems to be the next guy up on the list and on the mocks in terms of the, who Nebraska or who the NFL draft experts, expect to go next. And I mean, he's absolutely he's kind of a sterling example of what you got to do at Nebraska. They go and, pluck a high school quarterback out of Alabama, turn him into a defensive back. I mean, I know he wasn't expected to play quarterback at the college level, but what a success story. Got on the field right away, did what he did, enough to leave early for the draft. And he's probably going to get selected, so that's another one. It's not the in-state guy, but it's, we went out and found this guy and developed him, and a huge win if he gets selected.
Yeah, one of the things that always sticks with me about Cam Taylor-Britt is not only did they convert him from quarterback to defensive back and did that very quickly and very well, and that's credit to both Travis Fisher and Cam Taylor-Britt. The Nebraska didn't face, it wasn't like there were other like really big time schools coming after him, so it was like everyone missed the boat on him. I think his final three was Nebraska, Missouri, and Troy. I think whereas his last three, and it was that always kind of sticks to me that it felt like Nebraska that, and to me that shows that was a real good Nebraska like evaluation win. Like I really give them credit for being able to do that and then get him going pretty quickly. Like it was really fast that we heard about Cam Taylor-Britt being a guy that was going to be on the scene and playing pretty quickly. So I do think that is another one that you will see more promotion of about how they went and developed that. And then we want to go back to kind of hometown kids and what, or hometown players and what happened there. Austin Allen's story is really good too. Like it feels like now, like people, and it seems like to me that people act like we knew that Austin Allen was going to be really good. That wasn't necessarily the case because we've seen a lot of like tall, wiry tight ends that have come through Nebraska, and there's one, even in recent times, you've seen a lot of them. You've got a couple come in with Austin Allen, right? They're no longer with the program, and they don't always fill out, they don't always develop. But Austin's kind of perseverance and sticking with it and blossoming later in his career is actually another really good story that Nebraska can tell when it comes to, hey, recruits, look at what we're doing. And of course, Sean Beckton and his role in all of that. And I think that everyone will tell you that Beckton is one of the better developers and coaches on that staff. But there's a lot there for them to point to with Austin Allen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought him up because, I think anytime you get above 6'6", there's you start to walk it back a little bit. You just wonder, like, okay, is like being 6'8" good for football? And Jacob Padilla did a great yearbook story for last year's yearbook, 2022 yearbook coming soon. Subscribe now. Talking about how, he was primarily a basketball player until, some of his high school coaches said he might have a future in football. And it took a lot of hard work on Austin Allen's part to get to where he is now going into this draft week. And he's another one that if you want to put together the story around it, it's good. Because I don't remember what Austin Allen's offer list was like. I should have looked that up. But it wasn't Cam Jurgens. It wasn't a player that, was going to go out there and be a camp superstar and, get offers from multiple Power 5 schools. This was a guy who, and, we see this with Nebraska. It's one of those tricky areas where clearly one of the best players in the state, but he's out in Aurora, not going to have a huge offer list. Is he a guy? I mean, Nebraska, I think, was in on him pretty early. It was clear they were going to take him. It wasn't a deadline decision or anything, right. But it becomes one of those, hey, the best players in this state may not get the recruiting attention that, the equivalent player in Missouri might, but that's okay. Because you find the right guy, they can come in and do the work. And Austin Allen was Nebraska's second leading receiver last year. So it's again, another, I think, potential success story if he goes.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about like you're going to have guys like Austin Allen. And this happens every year, right? I see this every single recruiting class where there are guys in that group that are below that, that Caden Helms, Micah Riley Ducker. They're not that level, that notch below in terms of recruiting, that they're just not getting that attention. And because of that, people think, well, maybe Nebraska can slow play him. Can they get him as a preferred walk-on? Can all of that stuff? And I feel like we see all the time examples of guys that come and contribute to the team that fit into that category. And we have the next class. And if the season goes the way that it looks like it could go for, say, Garrett Nelson, he's another guy like that. Now it's a little bit different because he committed so early that it just was but he wasn't going to get that same recruiting attention. And I think that you knew that he was going to come to Nebraska, but he did not have many offers. Ethan Piper is another guy guy kind of like that has started games for Nebraska and did not have very much recruiting attention. And so I think that finding a way to blend kind of what you're seeing in this particular draft class. So you have to blend that 4-star from Nebraska that, like you said, you can't miss that guy. You have to land that guy. You also have to blend that with those evaluation wins from down south, which is something that they're going to try and do every single year based on where the staff comes from, and also develop guys like Austin Allen. While, oh, by the way, you got to go to Colorado and get a guy like JoJo Domann, who is another guy that when you talk about like how good he was at the end of his career, it was not always a foregone conclusion that the JoJo that we saw his final year versus what he was when he first got to Nebraska could not be more different. Like his rise is another great story that Nebraska has to tell.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, his game against Ohio State is, in terms of individual performances in a football game, probably one of the best of the past, 10 years at Nebraska. Like, I haven't spent any time like verifying that, but it stands out. And, so with him, he's right on the edge of that quote unquote 500 mile radius. So you look at this group as a whole, you got the no-brainer in-state kid, you got the hidden gem in-state kid, you got the hidden gem from Alabama, and then you got a guy who's kind of one of those fringe prospects on the fringe of what you typically consider your recruiting territory. So there's a lot to like there. And I think I would add to that for this, like JoJo's a unique player. He's a unique size. He has a unique skill set. And I think the feather in Nebraska's cap with him is they found a way to utilize all of those talents and probably put him in a position where he goes into, NFL draft consideration as kind of this jackknife player who can do a bunch of different things. And Nebraska, a lot of that was JoJo's talent and the work that he put in. But Nebraska got out of his way too. So, which may be a strange way to praise a coaching staff.
Right. Hey, sometimes it's like that, right? You have to be able to have the humility to just get out of the way and let someone be what they're going to be, which is right. It's a strange way to compliment someone, but it is a compliment when you get around to it. Now, every week we end the show with my favorite segment of the week. I'll put them on blast, where we basically put someone on blast for something that they did or said.
Put them on blast.
This week, we're going to switch it up. We're going to let Brandon go first. Brandon, who are you going to put on blast this week?
I am putting on blast the Batman. Have you seen this yet?
I have not, because it's super long. It's the only thing, and I've got to carve out some time. That's the thing that's keeping me back.
Yeah, so I'm old and washed and late to the party. I did not go see this at the theater. It's on HBO Max now for, I don't know, a certain amount of time. So I was like, okay. And Greg, I am not like a huge superhero guy, not a huge comic book guy, but the one that I've kind of watched consistently throughout are the Batman films, although I didn't watch the Ben Affleck ones. And watching this new one kind of made me understand why. This movie is so dark and bleak, and I just don't understand why Batman has to be that way now. Christopher Nolan did a good job with that kind of transition in a way that I very much enjoyed, but this one at 3 hours, I was like, it doesn't add anything to the canon of Batman. It's just 3 hours of bleak darkness. The Riddler, which Paul Dano did a great job playing the Riddler, is like verging on Saw territory creepy.
Okay.
I was like, why do we need our Batman to go that far? But the worst part about it is, so this, hopefully I'm not spoiling anything here. I don't think I could spoil anything because I was paying the minimum amount of attention because I knew I had 2.5 more hours to go. But at about that 30-minute mark, they take Nirvana's Something About the Way and put it in there for this like extended sequence, which made me very mad because you have the song from Nirvana that is like already kind of emotionally a downer and, emotionally powerful. And they put it in Batman. And I was like, what are you doing? You can't just usurp Nirvana's emotional resonance here, but that's exactly what they did. It was probably the best part of the movie, but it was also the worst part of the movie. I did not enjoy myself watching this film.
I'm gonna say I feel like you were going to say it was you were gonna go like make a total plot twist and go, you know what? But after all that, I loved it. But no, it's like it's interesting. Like I don't know if you've talked to Derek about this. I'm pretty sure he told me that he thought that was the second best one behind Dark Knight.
I think he said that.
I feel like he either told me that or put it on Twitter. So it's fascinating because, and like, this is like super inside baseball. We've had all these like random discussions in the Hail Varsity Slack channel about these superhero movies, and Brandon not watching them, and the only one he watches is Batman. And so now I don't know if all of this information makes me want to just check it out for myself, or if I just want to avoid it altogether. Like honestly, it hasn't really popped up on the radar yet. It's something like I'm like, man, I got to carve out the time to do it, and just sit down and watch it. I don't mind dark. Like I generally veer towards dark, which is part of why I like the Christopher Nolan version so much. I also like the Dark Knight Rises a ton with Bane. I stop it from like the last 15 minutes though, because I still, and I think I've said this on this podcast before, I find it completely ridiculous that we go through that whole movie with him being great and nothing can slow him down, and he basically like just falls apart at the end of the movie. Like it drives me nuts, but I'm not going to go on a rant, or that will be my blast. My put him on blast is actually Ben Simmons. So I feel like the Nets in general have been put on blast multiple times on this show, and everyone has taken a turn. I don't think Ben Simmons has yet. But what is going on with him? I guess is where I want to start, because I totally got what he was, or at least trying to say he was going through in Philadelphia, where he wanted the trade. Didn't feel like they believed in him. And then, like, he said that he had mental health problems. He needed to kind of step away and be away from the team. We're going to leave him alone for that. This is not about that at all. When did it turn into he has a back problem? Like, I don't know when that even happened. Like, I looked up yesterday, I get the alert. It's kind of out and about that because it was looking like he was going to play in game 4. Get the alert that, oh, no, he's actually going to be out. And it's because of a back issue. He woke up and it was more sore than they thought it was going to be. It was just a weird situation. And I find all of the stuff around Ben Simmons right now to be strange. I don't know when he's going to pick up a basketball again. For the Nets' sake, I guess you better hope it's next season sometime, because what's going to happen with that Nets team, and you're starting to see it because it sinks, because like NBA Twitter discourse can be both great and awful. It's verging on awful now when it comes to like the talk around Kevin Durant specifically, because now all of a sudden he's no longer a great player. He's still great, having some real struggles in this series. And Boston really is the perfect team to bring those struggles out, because they have such good perimeter defenders, including, the defender of the year in Marcus Smart to help guard him. But like they're verging on real issues, because they're not going to escape the scrutiny that, say, the Lakers or the Warriors face, and some others a little bit when it comes to their struggles. They're going to get into that territory, right? Is what I'm trying to say, where everything that they do is going to start to lead every debate show, and it's really turned on them in a hurry. Now all of a sudden you see the Steve Nash can't coach thing, which is actually true. I'm sorry, Jacob, it's actually true. Still don't understand how he got that job, but that's a totally different discussion. But back to Ben Simmons, he has to go on blast, because I don't know what's happening with him, if he's going to actually help this team, a team that is floundering and is going to probably have to do something sooner or later to kind of shake things up. And he's definitely a part of that situation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're going to have to watch our backs after this podcast, because Jacob's probably going to put you on blast and Derek's going to put me on blast for Batman. And so we'll just have to united front be aware there. The Nets, like I assume they're going to lose this Boston series. Like, they haven't been close. Yeah. They've looked directionless. They seem a little bit blocked in terms of like their long-term future. So I think you're right. Part of that's Durant, but you got to give credit to Boston with how they've defended him. Has he kind of done everything he could to try and find some easy points to maybe get things going? I don't know. Like, I haven't watched the Nets all season, but I've watched all 3 of their playoff games so far. And the Ben Simmons thing just adds to that, to have a player, he gets memed after game 3 for sitting on the bench, and then most of that game they're talking about, he'll be available. They expect to happen.
Right.
Maybe that can jumpstart them, and then all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, this back thing that's kind of been sitting there. So it's just a weird situation. They dealt with the Kyrie thing all season long, and I don't know. I mean, they went into this year as one of the title favorites, and they look aimless at the moment. And it kind of trickles down through all 3 of those. And if Ben Simmons is kind of the wild card that can make you not worry about Steve Nash's coaching and can allow Kevin Durant to, free him up a little bit. Like, we just don't know if he's ever going to be available or when. So it's a tough situation for a team that entered this season with pretty high expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know with the NBA, things can change swiftly in an off season. So they'll be one of the teams to watch, even though, like I said, they are their future is kind of handicapped because you have 3 max players on the team. It's always difficult in the NBA to kind of maneuver with that. And there's a number of guys like this. The NBA offseason is always interesting, but there are a number of guys that will be kind of in that trade discussion randomly, and that will provide some fireworks that are unexpected, because that always happens now in the NBA. We thought the NFL was crazy this offseason. I think the NBA will return to its normal craziness in the offseason this year as well, which I'm actually hoping for, because hopefully maybe that means my Lakers can actually get their crap together, because they definitely need it as LeBron dances on Instagram. But I'm not going to go on a Lakers rant. I say this every week that I'm going to try to make it through the episode without going on a rant. And I apologize to you guys for having to hear these rants every week, but I'm not going to do it. That is going to do it for us this week. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere you listen to it. Rate us and leave us a 5-star review. If you only leave 4, I'm inclined to think you're a hater, and nobody wants that. Make sure that you're checking out the other podcasts on the Hail Varsity Network, the Mind Your Own podcast, Varsity Club, Nebraska Preps postgame show, and the Hail Varsity radio show. Also, make sure you're checking out the Hail Varsity YouTube page. I'll be back on there with more recruiting content. We've got plenty of volleyball content from the weekend as well. You can also get after us on Twitter at Greg Smith HV and at Brandon Vogel. I will catch y'all next week.